Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cloud Wars Live, where we explore today's digital revolution by speaking with business executives and thought leaders who are changing how the world lives, works, plays, learns, and dreams. Our guest today is Will Grannis, Director of the Office of the CTO at Google Cloud. And this is also one of the episodes in our series called the Cloud Wars Top 10 Executive Insights. And today we'll get to talk with Will a little bit about some of the strategies that Google Cloud is bringing to bear in the marketplace. Will, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be here.
So, Will, there's lots going on at your company these days, right? Thomas Curran's been in a few months picking up with a lot of the huge momentum you folks have had, really looking to build up not just the key technological capabilities the company has, but also on the go-to-market side. So could you give a broad view, Will, where you see things right now for Google Cloud, and as far as your interactions with customers and just sort of how they're looking at the world these days and what you're trying to bring to them to help them achieve their goals?
Sure. Well, thanks, Bob. It's a real pleasure to be here. And it's an exciting time in Google, and it's an exciting time in Google Cloud. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One is I think Thomas has articulated pretty clearly, and even Sundar in the recent earnings announcement, is that Google is on the move in cloud. And not from a theoretical basis, but from an actual basis. In terms of customers who are putting a very meaningful, business critical systems, applications, into cloud and onto Google Cloud, that's sharply on the rise. We have a lot of examples of co-innovation between these large enterprises and Google Cloud. A couple of examples pop to mind, like Iron Mountain, a really amazing company that has had the archives of most of the companies in the world for many years. And now those companies are starting to unlock the power of those archives using data, analytics, machine learning, and cloud. Those examples are really a harbinger, I think, for this next wave of cloud, which is, if you think back, 10 years, I know it's hard, because we live in the, month by month rapid product velocity world. But if you think back about 10 years ago, a lot of the cloud discussion was around taking these storage, compute primitives that all companies were using and figuring out how to get them out of, your CapEx and your area and put them in somebody else's place. And now just 10 years later, we have entirely new business models, entirely new business lines being created through this convergence of these different cloud technologies and these platforms. So it is a really exciting time for all of us here at Google. And that commitment that you hear from Sundar and from Thomas around the strategy, around expanding the go-to-market teams so that more customers and more partners can take advantage of what I would contend is a pretty compelling technical foundation from Google. It's not one of those things that we ever hear from our customers and that our technology isn't good enough. It's that they want access to it. And so the strategy makes total sense for the wave that we're in. So as these businesses and partners create, that they have access to what we think is some pretty compelling technology and platforms.
Will, as you mentioned that example with Iron Mountain, it reminded me of one of the other customer stories that I think Thomas has emphasized around Next, which was media companies, right? They had this huge, files of things somewhere, but they were pretty much passive, and you've helped them light those up.
Yeah, think about stories. Stories are kind of the fundamental currency of human interaction. They have been since the beginning. They are today. Reference this podcast and the outreach to all of your listeners and the outreach between the two of us. Stories are really kind of form the foundation of what we see as the world around us. And so when I think about stories, I think about like the New York Times and I think about National Geographic, both customers who have highlighted their work with Google Cloud. But what was most important to us is that this started from a kernel of an idea that they had about how to tell stories that were kind of locked up in the old way of storing files or storing photos or storing, this large archive. And Marcus East, for example, the CTO of National Geographic, someone I respect greatly, he was at Next talking about how through the work, that Google Cloud, it was an honor to support him in this, but by being able to move their archive to Google Cloud, not only did they take advantage of modern compute and storage and efficiencies in the infrastructure, but they also unlock stories that had been kind of dormant for a long time. And if you're a photographer, this is the story of your life, camera in hand, seeing the world through this lens. And now everybody in the world gets access to what only was in the realm of a few photographers' viewfinder. And then every once in a while, the ones that made the print media, those were the ones highlighted. But imagine all the stories that are now being uncovered. That's the power of cloud. And to your point, media is one of those industries that the storytelling capacity, like the New York Times talking about their pictures that had stickers or writing on the back of them. And now through vision and machine learning, they can be auto tagged and available for processing, discovery, new stories. That's the type of world, and that's the type of storytelling that media companies are going to be able to do now and into the future, thanks to cloud.
Well, Will, if we could, one other extension off of that is, you described this 10-year time from, 10 years ago, a lot of companies were saying, I got to get my costs down. I'd prefer to begin to move out of the data center business and so on like that. Can you maybe help me with security as well? Now you're describing a way of not only all those good things, but at the far end, how they go into the future, reimagining themselves as something with more capability, more opportunity, and more value to the world of customers and prospects.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a very consistent pattern. So I have the privilege of leading a team called the Office of the CTO at Google. And this is not a team that you'll hear much about or hear directly from us too often. And the reason for that is because our whole mission is to create this technology bridge between the aspirations of business creation that these companies and partners have and the technology of Google. And it is very obvious to us that every large enterprise, every company that aspires to create value for their shareholders and for their customers and partners, they're all pursuing what I would call a two-pronged strategy. Strategy number one is cloud can offer efficiencies. It can offer the ability to invest in the future of those businesses. Two, it can enable those future businesses with sustainable business models that would not have been feasible before. In that Iron Mountain example, Iron Mountain had that concept for a while about how to take their archive, right? Their archives, global archives, and make them discoverable, get them to a place where, if you think about any process from e-discovery in legal to routine reviews of contract documents, now with this rich set of metadata and this rich archive, they're now able to create this business, but they couldn't create that business if they had to go invest in a bunch of infrastructure up front and then bet their personal, careers, bet their, company on, this innovation that was yet to be proven out. And so in a lot of ways, what we're seeing with this dual track is that the value realization of cloud infrastructure is the jet fuel for these future businesses, but the economics have to work, right? And now the economics are starting to work for some of these large scale distributed patterns. It's like, think about machine learning in general. 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, the concepts that we talk about in deep neural networks and machine learning today, the foundations of those ideas are 50 years old. But it's only when you can get the computation down to an economic rationality point. Does an algorithm or does a model building, does a company that wants to base a business line on the outcomes of these models, is that even feasible or practical, or even can the computation close in short enough time that all your engineers don't walk away and just, they're gone for 4 days while the big machine is out there cranking. Now you can distribute these jobs out, very much kind of extending this 15-year ago concept of distributed computing, but now putting it in the hands of any enterprise or any partner that has these aspirations. Pretty cool.
Well, it is remarkable stuff here. And, as you were describing that and, you're sort of bending time in certain ways or, fulfilling this future that's been offered. You think about something like the National Football League, right? There's 168 hours in a week. They play 17 weeks for 3 hours. Yet now through this expression of digital technology, some of the things you were talking about with New York Times, National Geographic, they've become a, 24/7 business. So in some ways, It seems like the customers who are coming to you want not just the technology that Google Cloud has, but also help us open up our imagination. And I really love that line you used, the aspirations of business creation. That's a good one.
Yeah, and sports are a really, really interesting example of where we see, the potential of cloud, just like a lot of different technologies converging, like edge, IoT, cloud, machine learning. So, for example, we did this partnership with the NCAA last year, right? And a lot of it was like extracting the many, many years of data and just getting it to a place where it could be computed upon and it could like inform coaches and teams. And, it was very much could this work? Just a year later, we have college kids running predictive brackets on decades worth of basketball data. You extend that even further. So my heart is in hockey. So I grew up playing hockey. I love hockey. I think the NHL is on the precipice of, the same type of transformation. So think about real-time strategies. If you're on the bench, right? And if you're able to capture this data and make sense of it in a timeline sufficient to affect your decision cycle, then what that means is you go in between the periods 1 and 2, and your coach now has a strategy that is based upon the actual gameplay of period 1, not, these batch jobs that have been running for a while. And all of this is possible because all these sports teams are basically, they're instrumenting all of their fields. They're capturing all of this video. There's a lot of stories around the NBA, the MLB, lots of NFL. They're all converging into this world. What's really fun for me to think about is I think the NHL is about to go through the same transformation. And when I was a kid, it was the chalk talk in the locker room beforehand and good luck. Now it could literally be, this is how the team is, countering our strategies in period 1. What can we do to change things up? And you've seen the impact. If you look at the sports teams that really outperform, a lot of them are adaptive strategy teams, not in kind of shorter time cycles. And that's the same across any industry. That decision it was in the military quite a long time ago. And one of the things we used to talk about was the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. And when you can be inside that loop, amazing breakthroughs are possible. And we definitely see the same thing, not just in sports, but across every industry. When you can get inside that decision loop, and when you can move faster than the pace of, your peers, because, in business, there is a little bit of a competitive aspect to it. But when you can move with that pace, you have the opportunity to create outsized returns for shareholders and breakthrough experiences for customers. And that's what we seek. And that's what we see not only in the NFL, but across every sport. And me personally, my time and attention will be a little bit weighted towards the NHL, though that does not imply any partnership or anything specifically. I have a passion around it.
Yeah, well, that's wild, as you described that, and it sounded like one of the things you were getting at, right? That sort of real-time decision-making analysis, performance improvement that can happen on sports teams in the NHL, something like that. It goes back to, you talked about getting inside the loops there, getting inside the data. A couple minutes ago, you described this notion of some of the co-creation adventures you've been on with customers. That's where things really start to happen, right? When you get the data, the insights, the opportunity to change, and these companies begin to evolve. So sort of writ large, what we've been talking about here is those things that happen on data-driven up, starting to put things together that were never before possible. It opens the mind to what can happen. And if the customer's in driving that with you, that's the golden opportunity, right?
Yeah, I've been attempting to innovate in the enterprise space for the last couple decades. And there is one very, very foundational element to succeeding in innovation, especially when you're in an area that is uncertain and what I call kind of like really large business value creation, is there's a lot of uncertainty. And this uncertainty can be handled in a couple different ways. One is you can spend a lot of time upfront trying to strategically plan it out, or you can start to iterate and to experiment and to engineer the uncertainty out of it. And what we see with cloud is it kind of gives people this superpower in the strategic planning process that allows them to move quickly not necessarily to, an answer, but to take some of the risk away, to take some of the uncertainty away. So just like you would build, a data model and an algorithm and a machine learning model and trying to see what lift you could get out of your results, the same thing is happening in the strategic planning process, which is that whole process is getting lift from the rapid availability of cloud infrastructure, machine learning, and the industry has now come to a point where it's so readily available. And we see this with Google Cloud especially, that like a capability like BigQuery. It used to be you came to cloud to get what you already knew you had in your data center, and you just wanted like the external version of it. Mm-hmm. But there is no comparison to an on-prem system for BigQuery, because it's literally you put your tables in and BigQuery computes across many, many millions of rows, right? And it just runs the computation for you without you having to do a bunch of infrastructure movements or like warn the other teams that no one's allowed to submit a query for the next 3 weeks because we're going to run all the computers. And that's a big part of this evolution as well, which is cloud is now opening up capabilities that are only possible in cloud, right? Whereas in the past, a lot of it was just like replicate my functionality. And so back to the strategic planning process, how does it change how a company thinks about driving the uncertainty out of a business decision when they can ask 1,000 questions in this and get answers back in the same time that before maybe they could ask a couple? And oh, by the way, they had to allocate millions of dollars before they could even ask the first 3 questions. And so that's what a lot of, especially in the CEO kind of boardroom level, that we're seeing a lot the impact, not just of cloud on the line of business or in IT, but actually in how the firm operates.
And now a quick break to hear from our sponsor. SAP Experience Management is helping businesses connect to their customers and then connect customers back to those businesses. Just listening to your customers is not enough. Businesses need to respond, react, and relate to them as individuals. Each one of them has his or her own likes, dislikes, and preferences. By combining experience data with operational data, SAP can help your business turn customer insights into actions that make their experiences better. SAP Experience Management helps you turn customers into fanatics and products into obsessions. Learn more at sap.com/xm. The best on SAP. Now back to the show. Yeah, well, so these are some remarkable insights here. Tell us a little bit about how Google Cloud's uniquely qualified to be able to help customers hammer through some of these breakthrough opportunities.
Yeah, so first off, I think it's really important for you and your listeners to hear from us that our vision is that we want to be the best cloud partner for customers, regardless of how or where they want to leverage cloud technology, because it's across the board, right? There are some companies that are born in the cloud. There are some companies that are doing their application rationalization and trying to figure out what to move to cloud. And sometimes there'll be mainframes that stay, and sometimes there'll be mainframes that go. But our really big vision is that we have this, and I think that we are well on our way here to creating a foundation and a baseline that whatever the customer choice, they can find a home in Google Cloud. And I will be very specific here. So, we just recently talked about Anthos at Next. Why would we do something like Anthos? Why would we, try to orchestrate and manage and help customers, empower customers to manage, disparate cloud providers and infrastructure components and, applications and services that are spanning, people's clouds other than our own potentially, right? Including on-prem, because that's what customers need, right? It's a very difficult lift to take an entire estate and move it all into the cloud. Some companies have done it. Many enterprises are finding their path to, a large cloud, if not, fully cloud strategy. So it's just a business reality that we have to be able to offer this. The good news is that we have a lot of the foundational pieces in place. The better news is that we've been developing them out in the open. So Istio and Kubernetes and a lot of the foundational technologies, Knative, that are embedded within Anthos, They're not some mystery, secret proprietary stuff that no one ever gets to see or understand. We're actually building it in the community because if you believe in this strategy, if you believe in the, help customers find a path, then you have to start the education, the training, the outreach, the developer awareness. You have to start that way ahead of time. So by developing in the open, it's literally the only way to make a strategy like that work. And I think Google has a really strong, and I know Google has a really strong history of open source, developing novel concepts in the open for how to compute, and then sharing that with the world, and then supporting it through thick and thin. And that's how you get the TensorFlows, the Kubernetes, the Istios, these really big foundational pieces for compute. So absolutely number one for us is this flexibility, right? So that businesses can deploy the way they want to deploy, right? And we will always be there to help them through whatever pattern that takes. And that's like a big, so it's all connected, right? So that's the technology, a little bit more of the technology strategy, but on the business side, this is why we have to have partners, right? Have a great experience with Google. So when Deloitte says we're their fastest growing billion-dollar business as Google Cloud, right? There's a reason for that, because we include them in the business planning, the architecture, the business model, the returns, right? And so if you're an enterprise company and a lot of your concerns have been around like managing vendors and getting them to work together, which has been a real pain, having not lived in Google my entire career and having been on the enterprise side and deploying technology and products, a big part of being a CTO of a public company is getting technology vendors to work together, right? Google is offloading a lot of that heartache. And if you look at the open source vendors, right? So for example, Confluent and Kafka, there are a lot of companies who have Kafka in their architecture. There are a lot of opportunities to suggest things other than Kafka, but if a customer really believes that's the best way to architect, then what Google Cloud does, and what you just saw at Next, is we want to have agreements with these open source providers, right? Confluent, so that the version that customers run is the latest, best, Confluent approved managed version, and that Google Cloud has already thought about that architectural pattern and it's baked in. So you get, one, in terms of Anthos, you get this kind of like wrapping up of a lot of the components and the relationships and the strategies, right? And the partnerships, simplified surface. But then you also get real economic outcomes and real business outcomes for the companies that are tying their future to it, which makes it stable, supportable, and de-risks customer choice for a position like that.
And well, one of the things that also came out at Next is you were describing the open source relationships and how that's fully fused into how Google looks at things, was almost like that business model approach that Thomas had described, right? We're talking about de-risking not only on the technology side, but on in some ways the commerce, the transactional side.
Yeah, what happens if we extend the concept of the cloud providers basically taking versions of open source, building their own, right, as a pattern? What if that pattern extends? I always like to ask the question, what happens if we see more of something? Well, what happens if we see more of that? Are companies still going to get formed, get early adoption with developers? Are we still going to see this kind of amazing velocity of open source innovation that's fueled a lot of advances in databases, messaging systems, orchestration of containers, machine learning? Look across the entire IT landscape, and it is a history in a lot of ways founded in open source. And so, for us, we are doing this because it's good business, right? It's good strategy, but it really requires that integrated relationship. And we do think about the entire lifespan of an open source company, and we do see it as our responsibility as Google to support not just individual companies, but the open source ecosystem as a whole. And we have seeded it before, we have benefited from it, and we want to make sure our customers and our partners get the benefit of this kind of 2 decades of Google working out in the open and being partners with open source, and also deploying our own out into the world and supporting it. We just, it's imperative. It's imperative for that entire value ecosystem that, at least in Google's case, we believe strongly in making sure it's stable.
Yeah, I haven't heard of another one of the big tech companies doing that. So that novelty an innovative approach, both on the technology side and the integration of that and the reliance on it. And then also, as you just described there, about the business model side. And Will, another issue where Google Cloud rightly, I think, takes a lot of pride in what it's doing there is cybersecurity. And right, we talked a little bit ago about the perception over not that many years of something being just the way it is to now. It wasn't that long ago, right? The questions about the cloud were, well, can they match my, as a business, level of security? And that's been completely flipped upside down, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so who are the large enterprises adopting cloud? Financial services, healthcare, governments, they all have a very, very, kind of top of the concern, list of things, and security is at the very top. And regulation is a reality for all three of those markets. And so it's also about making sure that the security approach is well integrated into the concept of these regulatory frameworks and how those businesses are even going to be allowed to operate. And so you have probably observed a high velocity of investment and progress from Google Cloud specifically around certifications, accreditations, regulatory approvals. What I think is even more interesting than that is that there's a very clear and consistent pattern and philosophy that you can pull out of our activity around the ability for customers to take out their data with simple, easy to use, understandable tools. The ability, we piloted the transparency report, right? So if someone wants to access your data, there's a log generated. So let's say a customer says, hey, we want support to come help us with this thing that we have. Now, granted, we hope that doesn't happen too often, right? Because we like cloud to be an awesome experience. But every once in a while, Bob, it does happen that we get a support ticket. And in those support calls, we want to make sure that customers know exactly who and when and for how long anybody has, accesses their data. So one, we can't do it without their permission. And two, we're going to give them logs. And now we give them logs in near real time so they can see that you can actually see the activity of Google at your request, accessing data. And when you taking it even a step further, which is customers also want to have lots of flexibility and choices around how they're the custodians of their data and their security. And so customer managed encryption keys and the ability to have very tight control, even though we encrypt in transit and at rest across the entirety of Google Cloud. That's not even enough. And we have to do even more, and we have to give customers all of these choices, and in doing so, really give them the security lead, because while we are an infrastructure provider, platform provider, and partner on the cloud side, they have to feel good about their risk posture, and they have the audits that they have to integrate with, and our transparency reports. We put white papers out on our cloud.google.com site that go in great detail about how we meet compliance regimes. All of this, right? Think about the investment that these companies are getting. So for example, if a large financial services company is investing with Google Cloud, now they get transparency reports, they get logs, they get the ability to take out, they get the ability to manage a custodial strategy with best practices and, and things that are already, line of sight to regulatory frameworks. Any individual company trying to get all of that on their own is a huge investment, a huge headache. And with cloud, this is, and especially with Google, with all these mechanisms I've described, it completely changes the dynamic around security being one of these like really hard investments to make, because you want to put everything into, the revenue creation and the sustainment of the revenue creation. But now security is like this kind of like super secret, like, built-in feature of their architecture. And so we've definitely seen that shift over the last, I'd say 3 to 5 years, from a lot of like concerns, questions, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, into it actually being an enabler and moving faster through regulatory frameworks and audits and the rest, based on having these tools available and data that they didn't even have before, that now that they can have and hand over to the appropriate regulatory regimes and audit regimes.
Yeah, it's wild. And in such a short period of time, how that perspective and capability has flipped. And Well, I wanted to check in with you. You know, this has been remarkable. Some of the things you've talked about, really interesting. Could you give us a synopsis, please, on, you know, sort of Google Cloud's outlook, three areas. One is, you know, customers sort of top of mind for them. What are they trying to do today? Two is your partners. You've mentioned some of the things partners are doing. And the third one is competitors.
Sure. So let's see. Let's start with customers because I think everything starts and ends with customers. Thomas has been really clear about the strategy. And the number one element on the strategy is he wants to make sure that customers can take advantage of all these benefits that we've been talking about from Google Cloud. And so number one on the strategy is making sure that our go-to-market team and the team that interfaces primarily with customers, is, and I think today already a world-class team, but has the world-class reach that we really need, and that our customers are asking us for, right? This is a demand pull from the customer side. And so we're laser focused on making sure that customers have a path to Google and that they have a great relationship on that path with Google. It's already pretty great. We just want to scale it out. From the partner side, you've heard me describe probably 5 to 7 different very specific examples of how we believe that, and I think I know our actions prove it. When it comes to partners, we want to build relationships that have sustainable economic foundations and where partners succeed because of their relationship with Google Cloud in ways that they weren't succeeding before. And I go back to like Iron Mountain, which created an entirely new line of strategic business that they built a platform that they can offer into the market, right? And we just kind of feel like maybe we play some small part in giving them the superpowers to, kind of do that, experiment, learn, and externalize it, all the way to like a Deloitte. When one of the world's top consulting firms says we're their fastest growing billion-dollar business, my guess is that might have taken some people by surprise. Didn't take us by surprise, but I see more and more examples of platforms and ecosystems that our customers want to create and enable in the world, right, being built on top of this foundation. And so we have a really strong responsibility to make sure that we continue to partner with them, that the business models are ones that feel very like fluid between the two organizations. And our open source partnerships are another just example of, even when it's early, or even when it isn't necessarily like a Deloitte or an SAP or an Iron Mountain, you can look at like Mongo, and you can look at Kafka, and you can look at some of the key partnerships. There's a reason why those partnerships are in place, right? They represent the desired patterns of our customers. And so making sure that, the partner approach is not just, in like the global consulting, firms, it's not just with the big, kind of like co-creation partners, but it's also seeding the future of the market. And these partnerships are strong so that this is like, we're in cloud for the long haul. Decades and decades. This is a decades-long market. And so you have to be across all three, I think, in order to be successful. And then from a competition perspective, we just want to make sure that people understand what we're about. And we want to make sure that our customers, developers, partners, these ecosystems, we're spending a lot of time communicating, right? This is an example of something that, a couple of years ago, we didn't have this conversation. Now we do. And now there's a lot of great stuff to talk about. And we want to make sure that we broadcast our position, broadly and specifically. And we're very encouraged by how customers and partners are making their choices. And I think Sundar was very, I think he gave a really good indication in the last earnings call around, when we talk about the number of large customers and how that velocity is growing. I think it's a pretty exciting future for all of us here.
It is, and Will, please, one last question here. If you take a look back a little bit, as you talk about the future and connecting the recent past to the future, another good partner for Google Cloud, Accenture, every year when they do their tech vision projection and the big ideas that are going to come up that year, I was at the event, I guess it was in January, February, and they started by taking a look at some of their past themes for the year. It was 2013. They said every business is a digital business. So, they're out ahead of the things a little bit there, but that was 6 years ago. So these businesses that are starting to work with Google Cloud now, they're not you talk about the tech transformation being over, decades and how they've got to have that coexistence. But the imperative for these companies to sort of start moving into the types of companies they need to be, there's an urgency to that, right? It's time for these companies to get going.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was my point earlier about, the strategy is not necessarily a new strategy for these companies. What is changing is the applicability of technology to give them the superpowers to build those businesses and to do it in an economically rational way, right? And so, I personally work across what I'd say roughly our top 100 customers and partners in this role. And it is consistent that strategies that people used to think were unachievable because they couldn't engineer out the uncertainty to the point where they could feel confident about pushing a lot of effort behind something, that decision cycle is changing. And if you think about the availability of data analytics, even in the boardrooms and in the line of businesses now, for what would have cost you millions of dollars in fixed infrastructure, you can get for thousands of dollars in consumption, and you can do it faster, right? And it's only kind of limited by the questions that you can ask. I think a real reason why to your point, like people are rushing in, is because these platforms like what we're building at Google, people have now seen the opportunity to leverage them to take all that creativity that all of these companies have, whether it's aerospace, retail, manufacturing, media, healthcare, financial services, government. There are innovators everywhere. Google does not have the market on innovation. These companies do. And it's a real privilege for us, right, to see an opportunity where our paths and theirs now are increasingly coming into alignment. And I would contend that a lot of the work that we've done around open, multi-cloud, hybrid, a lot of these bridging concepts that we've talked about today now make it possible for those companies to go completely digital, just like others have done over the last 5 years with Google. Now more and more will have the opportunity to do so. So yeah, it's definitely, I think it's been on the horizon for a while. I think digital transformation has been a term that's been around for a little bit. But now the reality of the platforms and the reality of the services and products that are available make digital transformation something that doesn't require the huge investments up front in order to achieve. And by de-risking it, you're now inviting more people in.
Well, that's fantastic. Will, is there anything that you want to be sure to address before we wrap up?
No, I think from my perspective, and being a part of this function that again works with kind of our top customers and partners, what's really exciting is that list keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's forcing my team to get more stretched and thin and stretched and thin. And I think that that's actually the natural order of things, which is I think we're past the early-ish days of cloud question mark, and now we're in the days of cloud exclamation mark, to your point. And now it's about the sustainability of the relationships, the business models, the economics, the competitive, element that's within each of these industries and across industries. And it's really exciting to watch companies move from digital transformation as a concept to actually building their own platforms and their own ecosystems to win in the market. And so we're just really thrilled and privileged to be a part of that journey. And it's been really great hanging out with you here for a little while.
Will Grannis, Google Cloud, thank you so much for making the time to be with us. This has been wonderful.
Thanks, Bob.
And thanks to all of you folks for tuning in here to Cloud Wars Live. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Cloud Wars Top 10 Executive Insights, featuring Google Cloud and some of the wild things that it's doing with customers. Thanks a lot. Hope we'll see you next time.